you talking about abstract work and that it is specifically queer or it's specifically LGBT, because I love the divisions between our identities too. But as a feminist, I'm curious as if you're feeling as though you're being driven by the word queer in creating something that is monoculture rather than diverse in the talking of our art.
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand, except that I don't really, like I said, I don't think about making feminist work or queer work as I go into the studio. I just do the work, and then some works deal more with one subject, another a little bit, another. And you can do different kinds of reads. Like I said, as I started the presentation tonight, all work participates in multiple narratives. So you could take these paintings and we could do a presentation within modernist painting, within monochrome painting, with a feminist analysis, with a queer analysis, about art in New Mexico, mixed media, women over a certain age,
That's the great thing about abstraction.
So all of those are of interest to me. I mean, I'm not trying to diminish those, and sometimes with different pieces, certain of those conversations are more relevant or perhaps have a different radicality at a particular point in time. So things that were radical gestures, say for feminist artists in the early 70s, there's still valid things to do today, say with referencing those traditional arts or medieval arts or something, but they don't have that radicality. The gesture doesn't have the radicality that it had historically, at a particular time and place. So the question is, how can one, if you're interested, use these and use them in a fresh way or a way that's meaningful to you? It's not, all I can say, it's not something I worry about. It's just not what I think about. I'm really, the works are more focused on the work, the piece, from piece to piece to piece. And the other stuff is just there. It's there. Now, it's more overt in some pieces, and it's more coded and accessible to different audiences, perhaps. And in others, because abstraction, what's wonderful is just, it's not like there's just abstraction and figuration or representation. There's this wonderful range of work. And, there were many artists, other artists, for instance, that I could have, whose work I could have presented tonight. Some of them are here in this audience. But, and then there's a lot of work that is, what you referred to, Julia, abstraction that's on that edge of figuration, or figuration that's become so abstracted. And how do artists navigate that space? So that's what's kind of really wonderful. It's not just either or. And I'm interested in all the nuance in between. So I don't know if that answers you, but it's just not my headset. So I don't worry about whether my work is feminist or queer. I got too much else to worry about.
Grommets.
Grommets. Well, this is true.
What's the issue with grommets?
They're expensive, and I'm very excited when I can find bigger and better grommets.
Don't I know it?
I have a question, actually. How long do you spend on your paintings, if you could average?
Well, I often get asked that question, and I don't know. It's just that they are very layered. It's not about putting on a thick layer of textured paint all at once. Some people do that, but it's a very different look, and I'm not interested in it. So I move very slowly, and it's just layered, and it just takes the time that it takes to get there. It's not about getting there fast. And so that's connected to even your question, because I don't have I mean, I described like Linda Bessimer's process for those striped paintings. I'm sure there's some variation in there because there usually is with most artists. But she does have a process for how to do those double-sided sheets of acrylic. I have a much looser sense of process of how I might layer paint and knowing, and in the beginning, it's really pretty mindless. It's only at a certain point where I think, maybe this could be the top layer. Maybe I'm there. Does it have enough presence? Is this it? That it really starts getting interesting. And that's the place where I struggle in that work that we were talking about. You know, because something is happening. In the beginning, it's nothing. It's just layers of paint. So, you know, how does it become something? That's really the issue. But I mean, how does it do that in a way that brings content and meaning in, associations in, about, you know, bodily experiences or how we relate in space or whatever.
Well, this just kind of seems to follow. I was fortunate enough to see the work in New York, and I was really drawn to everyone and just looked and think. So I'm wondering about your titling, because I remember looking at Red Bed and really being drawn into it and seeing all these pieces in there, and then seeing the title and then going, oh, I'm getting all this other work in there. So some of them seem to be specifically titled, such as that, and then Buff is not specifically titled. So how do you find, so when you were working on Red Bed, was it Red Bed until you, or was it Red Bed later?
Well, that's a
how
good
do you
question.
find those titles?
That's a good question about that particular painting. In general, I mean, Tirza, we talked about a number of ways I title things, sometimes color references, and sometimes body references. It's sometimes verbs, I mean, words that are both nouns and verbs. Red Bed, as I was working on it, I became very aware that this particular painting was an homage to Rauschenberg's Bed. That it was a painting, his famous bed painting, which I was aware of as an art student in undergraduate school. And that period of his work in terms of its assemblage, materiality, juxtaposing things together that may or may not go together. But the notion of that bed was a painting I loved, and I still love. So it's bed sized. I don't know, single bed sized. I don't know if it's the size of his painting, but it's single bed sized. And as I was working on it, I became aware of that, and it became in a certain way an homage. And the red, I wasn't trying to reference his period of red paintings, but one could go there, you know. And how his red, or his series of white paintings or red paintings also are monochrome, or near monochrome, they're near monochrome, but again, there's a materiality that you know, makes the surface interesting, that activates, that engages the surface. So there was that reference. There also was something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I'm working on, here's really what was happening. I'm working on this painting. I'm just making my painting, like I said. You know, making formal decisions and, you know, kind of loving it and so forth. And then, but there was something really familiar to me about it as I was working on it. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I got to the Rauschenberg reference, but I couldn't figure out why this was so familiar. And it was only, I don't know, it was because I was going through my archives or I was giving a talk, that I came across an image of an early piece of mine from 1971 that is called Large Red Blanket. And it is an early piece I made right after I moved to New York, and I was taking old curtains and fabric and just dipping them in acrylic paint. So the acrylic paint went right into the pores of the fabric. It became almost leather-like. They are unstretched paintings, no grommets. And see, grommets have their own painting history. A lot of artists were doing grommetted paintings as an informal way to present paintings in the late 60s and early 70s. I wasn't even doing that. There were no grommets. They were push-pinned on the wall. Okay, so So there was that reference. And then what's on this big red blanket unstretched, where the weight of the materials of the acrylic paint and the fabric alters the painting rectangle, are rags, strips, tied, dipped in red, hanging on the surface. That's all that's there in a few patches. So there's nothing there again except this very little bit activating the surface. And I realized that these strips hanging down were like three-dimensional brushstrokes, basically. So here was this piece. It was very familiar because, in a funny way, 50 years ago, I made a very similar piece. But the title refers more to Rauschenberg's painting. So sometimes you do something, you know, I didn't go to the studio to make an homage to Rauschenberg, but it was that, and there was that connection. And, you know, we all do that, so I like to acknowledge it. But I think often it's, as artists too, we make work where we've done something very similar in the past, and you think you're struggling, you think you're doing something really different, and then you just realize so many of the visual strategies of the content are the same, and you go, oh my God, you know, I'm still doing the same thing.
We do that as writers too.
I was just going to say that. We did that as writers. It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
I think we are.
I think we have like, just, you know, closing remarks. Anybody, I just want to thank you, and thank you all. Halloween has never been better. This is really, we've got to do this again every year. This is really great. But thank you so much for coming and for contributing to this conversation and for taking time away from trick-or-treating and, you know, celebrating the giants and all the other things they might be doing after this event. Thank you so much, and especially thank you to Harmony for coming, and Julia also far from the third wheel.
Yes,
absolutely.
really.
You know, and I just, the triangulation with you has been a pleasure, and